What if the most advanced survival machine on Earth was never built from metal or stone, but from wool, breath, and memory? What if the secret to surviving 50 degrees below zero was not strength, not technology, not walls, but movement and listening to the land? On the Mongolian steppe, there are no forests to block the wind, no mountains to soften the cold. Only open earth and a sky that offers no mercy. And yet for thousands of years, families slept here, children grew old here. Civilizations rose and vanished while these people endured, not because they conquered nature, but because they understood it. Today we are not looking at a tent. We are entering the mind of ancient Mongolian survival. And the structure they built was not a house. It was a decision. For the ancient Mongols, the steppe was never an empty space waiting to be claimed. It was an active force, a system that punished mistakes with precision rather than chaos. Winter did not approach gradually. It arrived like a closing mechanism. Temperatures slipped past -40°C and continued downward into ranges where survival ceased to be a matter of endurance and became a matter of minutes. The wind never paused. With no forests to slow it and no hills to fracture its flow, it accelerated across open ground, uninterrupted building speed and pressure, until it stripped heat from the body faster than flesh and blood could generate it. Breath turned brittle, moisture crystallized in the air. Metal betrayed those who trusted it. Struck in the cold, it fractured instead of bending. Water abandoned its liquid state almost instantly. Exposed skin did not burn or scream. It failed silently, at first numbing before dying. There were no trees to lean against, no stone to stack into walls, no fixed refuge capable of remaining in one place year after year without being tested and eventually destroyed. Rectangular structures revealed their weakness immediately. Flat walls offered resistance instead of compliance. The wind seized them, pressure built, roofs lifted, corners split. The steppe did not reward strength, it punished rigidity. To live here, a structure could not argue with the land. It had to yield. It had to flex. It had to be ready to leave. This is where the Mongol world begins. The ancient Mongols did not choose the circle for beauty, tradition, or ritual meaning. They chose it because the wind instructed them again and again with consequences. On the open steppe, every structure is tested continuously. The land allows no pause and no forgiveness. Anything that presents a flat face invites attack. A circular wall offers no edge to seize, no corner where pressure can accumulate, no surface for the wind to strike and tear away. Instead, the air divides and flows, moving around the structure rather than colliding with it. The roof slopes low and inward, not upward like a challenge thrown against the sky, but downward like an answer shaped by experience. Snow does not pull at the structure. It presses it down, anchoring it more firmly to the ground. As the storm intensifies, the house does not resist. It responds. The harder the wind blows, the more tightly the structure holds itself together. This was not symbolism, and it was never aesthetic theory. It was physics learned through repetition and loss. Each collapsed roof before it, each wall torn away in the night, each animal frozen beside a failed shelter. These were the experiments that preceded the Gur. The results were final. The Ger was not designed in a moment of inspiration. It was shaped slowly by disaster, refined by weather, corrected by survival. It was not invented. It evolved. The skeleton of the Ger was built from wood, but never from rigid wood. The ancient Mongols selected willow, birch, and larch not for strength and resistance, but for strength and recovery. These woods bend under load and return to form. They absorb shock instead of transferring it. On the steppe, this difference is the boundary between survival and collapse. The walls were not walls in the conventional sense. They were lattices, interlocking wooden strips pinned into diamond shapes that could expand and contract as conditions demanded. When snow accumulated on the roof, the weight did not converge on a single beam or joint. It dispersed. Dozens of roof poles carried the load downward into the lattice, where force was shared and guided into the earth. No joint bore too much stress. No fracture occurred suddenly or without warning. Metal had no place here. At -50°C, it turns brittle and snaps without yielding. It also conducts cold directly into the interior, creating invisible channels of heat loss. Instead, the Mongols relied on rawhide. Strips of camel hide were tied while wet and left to dry. As the hide contracted, it locked the joints tightly together while retaining elasticity. In blizzards, these joints flexed, absorbing kinetic energy rather than shattering. During storms, the structure moved. It shifted and breathed with the wind. It did not resist force. It translated it. The ancient Mongols understood a principle many modern builders ignore. Survival does not favor systems that stand rigid. It favors systems that bend and return before they break. The wood of the ger provided shape and order, but it never provided warmth. Structure alone cannot defeat cold. Warmth came from felt. Sheep wool was beaten, soaked, rolled, and dragged across open ground for kilometers until individual fibers locked together at the microscopic level, forming a dense, unified skin. This material did not unravel and it did not fracture. It aged slowly. It breathed. Felt absorbed moisture from every source inside the ger, from human breath, from boiling tea, from sleeping bodies releasing steam into the enclosed air. And as it absorbed that moisture, it released heat. Not symbolic warmth, not comfort by association. Chemical heat generated through molecular bonding. The walls became a living thermal system, responding dynamically to the falling temperature of the night. As the air grew colder and more humid, the felt released more energy, buffering the interior against sudden loss. The structure did not simply resist the cold, it answered it. Modern insulation fails in this environment because it traps moisture. Condensation freezes. Thermal performance collapses. Felt behaves differently. It allows moisture to migrate outward, where it freezes harmlessly beyond the living space, leaving the interior dry and functional. The ancient Mongols did not speak of vapor barriers or hygroscopic reactions. They did not need to. They felt the difference when the fire burned low and the night pressed in. Fuel came from the herd. Dung dried and compacted into dense blocks burned slowly, releasing steady, radiant heat through long winter hours. The stove sat at the exact center of the ger, not by tradition, by thermodynamics. Heat rose, struck the curved roof, flowed down the walls, and returned again, creating continuous circulation. There were no cold corners, no stagnant air pockets. The ger did not fight the laws of thermodynamics. It orchestrated them. Ancient Mongols named winter disasters because to name something was to understand it. Language became a survival tool long before it became history. Each form of winter carried a distinct behavior and demanded a different response. White death buried the land beneath heavy snow, sealing the ground, insulating it from deeper cold while slowly suffocating movement, access, and air. Paths vanished. Animals disappeared beneath drifts. Ventilation narrowed, and smoke turned from warmth into danger. Black Death arrived without snow. Water froze solid. Wells locked shut. The ground remained bare, and wind scoured heat from the base of the shelter, stealing warmth through contact with frozen earth. Livestock starved while standing on exposed pasture they could not reach. Iron Death transformed the steppe into glass. A brief thaw melted snow into slush before temperatures collapsed again. Ice sealed the ground, reflecting cold back into the night sky, amplifying thermal loss. Animals could see food beneath their feet but could not break through to reach it. Cold death was the most absolute. No snow, no ice storms. Only temperature dropping beyond memory, testing the limits of flesh, fuel, and felt together. Each disaster exposed a different weakness: ventilation, fuel storage, mobility, construction discipline. The ger endured because it addressed all of them at once. It could be cleared of snow, repaired in place, adjusted for airflow, or dismantled and moved entirely. It was not protection from disaster, it was engagement with it. The ger did not promise safety, it offered better odds. The ger alone was never sufficient. A structure could shape heat, but it could not generate endurance on its own. The human body had to change with the season just as the shelter did. Survival on the steppe demanded metabolic adaptation rather than comfort. Summer was a period of lightness. Milk fermented into yogurt and air-dried curds cleansed the body after months of scarcity. These foods were not chosen for pleasure. They regulated digestion, restored balance, and prepared the body for the demands ahead. Winter required the opposite response. Fat and meat were consumed in quantities that modern diets would fear or condemn. Mutton, beef, and horse supplied dense energy and essential fats. Digesting them generated heat. Dietary thermogenesis became an internal fire matching the stove at the center of the gur. Calories were not excess. They were insulation. They were time. Clothing followed the same logic. Garments trapped layers of still air rather than relying on thickness alone. Boots were shaped to create pockets of warmth, protecting immobile toes in the saddle. Fur was selected for how it managed moisture from breath, preventing ice buildup rather than for appearance or status. Nothing in this system was ornamental. Every element was calibrated to the same environmental pressure. The body and the ger were not separate solutions. They were one integrated system, responding together to cold, wind, and scarcity. The door of the ger always faced south. This orientation was not ritual, and it was not symbolic. It was meteorology. By turning the entrance away from the dominant north and northwest winds, the opening avoided the worst storms of winter. Snow drifted past rather than piling at the threshold. Cold air was deflected before it could enter the living space. At the same time, the southern exposure welcomed the low winter sun. Light entered through the central roof ring and moved slowly across the interior walls as the day progressed. This movement required no mechanism, no calibration. It was predictable and precise. Work followed the sunbeam. Milking, grazing, cooking, and rest aligned themselves to the light as it touched specific points along the lattice wall. The house itself became a chronometer. No clock was needed because time was visible. The ger measured it in warmth and shadow rather than minutes. Interior space was organized by thermal logic rather than hierarchy. The area farthest from the door remained the warmest and belonged to elders and honored guests. Tools were placed where hands could find them without thought. This order reduced friction during long months of confinement when leaving the shelter was dangerous or impossible. Psychological stability became as essential as insulation. Survival on the steppe was not only physical, it was mental. The most important feature of the ger was never how firmly it stood against the wind. It was how quickly it could vanish from the landscape. In less than an hour, the structure could be reduced to bundles of wood, felt, and rope balanced onto animals. What had been a home moments before became a moving load. The shelter followed the herd. The people followed energy. On the steppe, food was not stored in buildings. It moved on four legs. When pasture failed, remaining in place was not endurance. It was delay. Static houses became traps. They locked families to depleted ground and exposed them to disasters they could not escape. Mobility was not convenience. It was insurance written into daily life. The ancient Mongols did not believe in permanent security. They understood that stability on the steppe was temporary by nature. What could be trusted was readiness. When grass died, they left. When storms gathered, they moved before the land decided for them. Retreat was not defeat, it was strategy. The ger was never meant to anchor people to a place. It was designed to release them. It was not home in the modern sense. It was permission to survive again somewhere else. The Mongolian ger was never meant to be eternal. It was never designed to stand unchanged against time. It was meant to endure by yielding. This structure carries a lesson older than cities and older than monuments. Survival is not domination. It is alignment. When humans listen carefully to wind, to cold, and to scarcity, and answer with humility rather than force, they endure longer than empires built on permanence. The ger does not conquer the steppe, it collaborates with it. Across thousands of years, this quiet philosophy allowed families to live where stone walls would fail and fixed foundations would become graves. The wisdom of the ger is not in its materials, but in its restraint. It takes only what is needed and releases everything else. If this story echoes something in your own family history, memories of migration, settlement, endurance, or adaptation carried across generations, you are invited to share that memory below. Each recollection is not merely a comment. It is an act of preservation. If this journey through ancient survival left an impression, a quiet like and a thoughtful subscription help ensure these stories continue to be told. Because history does not survive through monuments alone, it survives through people who remember,